This House to order. Welcome to the semi-finals of Uadc 2014. On side government, we have Mubarrat, Shafiq, and Ameera. On opposition, we have Rafiq, Shafiq, and the Maizura. On my left is from Philippines. On my right is Wassey from Indonesia. From China. from Japan. Saddiq from India. And Sana from Singapore. My name is Rohan. I will be a chair for today. Please keep cheering to a minimum. Please keep all phones on silent. Please do not leave the room in the middle of speeches. Without further ado, I would like to invite the Prime Minister to begin the debate on the motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's heartbreaking to see that in the West Bank, Palestinians die on a daily basis. They're being forced to move out. They're being discriminated by virtue of being a Palestinian. Yet us as the international community are still hesitant in calling and categorizing this as ethnic cleansing. We reject this. It's about time we change, and it's about time we recognize their sufferings and have the guts to categorize it as ethnic cleansing. In my speech, first off, I'll tell you what are the standards in determining, what is ethnic cleansing, and secondly, what is the good outcome out of categorizing the situation on the grounds of West Bank as a form of ethnic cleansing. First, standards. What are the standards in determining ethnic cleansing? First off, if we look within the 1900s, the standards have always been deaths, right? Like you look in Rwanda, the sort of situations that happened on the ground between the Hutus and the Tutsis, how they killed each other, and before the idea of before occupying a particular territory, they were willing to send out missiles to clean them out. It's either to kill them or to intimidate certain individuals who are still left alive, just so that these individuals will further move on out of fear of being further killed. When you see the Black Friday event happening where KH-59 missiles were sent into the southern West Bank, this was included within the Goldstone reports that records human rights abuses. These are all of the things that have been occurring on the ground that is similar to the past ways in which we categorize ethnic cleansing. Yet we still don't. The fact is, like the situation on the ground is so bad that even after intimidation or even after any forms of killing or sending out of missiles, which they already do, once the Israelis move into West Bank, they don't just, immediately get it. Obviously, they'll see individuals on the ground who still refuse to leave, who still want to fight for their country, who still want to fight for their particular rights to that territory. But what was the reaction of Israelis? They rolled them over with the tanks that the United States of America were willing to continuously supply them with. And their excuse and the scapegoat that they give is, oh, this isn't ethnic cleansing. Oh, we've already warned them. If they want to stay there, then they're just basically declaring war, and they're acknowledging themselves as the enemy of the state of Israel. And that's exactly the rhetoric that President Benjamin Netanyahu used within the AZ2 zone, whereby they send out missiles and they bomb the entire place, and Palestinians die. 50, even though that's not a huge number to some of us, considering the fact that we hear thousands of lives being lost, but every single life counts. And the fact that this is being done towards the Palestinians, and the very fact that Benjamin Netanyahu still gets to say that this is a form of, declaring our rights over a state, that's not something we agree with. But moreover, what is the second more important yardstick of determining when ethnic cleansing happened? Is when forceful removal of a particular ethnic over a land is acknowledged. And this is different than any forms of land reclamation like the aborigines between more urbanized states happen. Why? Because if we look in an instance, like in the past where the apartheid happened within South Africa, there wasn't explicit majority killing, but it was forceful removal of a particular race without giving them any forms of compensation, any forms of agreement, any forms of concession. And even then, in the event that they move these people out, they move them into a place where there is no means for them to be able to further survive with their lives, right? They're always placed at a disadvantage, and it's purely because they are Africans and they're not white. right? We don't think this is something that is fair, and it's happening on the ground as we speak, because Palestinians are being forcefully removed out of the West Bank by virtue of being a Palestinian and one who does not subscribe to the religion of Judaism. We don't think that's something we want. The fact that no compensation is given whatsoever by the Israelis towards the Palestinians, and we've seen this happen over and over again. Why? Because it's politically unpopular. President Benjamin Netanyahu in 2001 even wanted to give some compensation, but the people on the ground told him that this wasn't something that we wanted for Palestine, because they felt that compensation was an admittance of guilt, especially when Israelis themselves say that that is my right over that land. Why on earth should I give them any forms of compensation? That's how cruel they're treating the Palestinians, and that's why our side of the house doesn't want to agree with that, right? Yes.
We should delineate the standards of what ethnic cleansing is and what war crimes are.
But ethnic cleansing is considered a war crime, right? It's a violation against human rights. Anyways, so what happens now that the Palestinians are being forcibly removed out of the West Bank? They have no other alternatives but to actually move into Hamas-dominated territory. What are these territories exactly, and how do they impact the people on the ground, the Palestinians? These are places that have continuous terrorist action. These are places where they are forced to start with nothing, because when they left, they were leaving in fear. I mean, don't tell me they had a few seconds and minutes to go, okay, let me just bring my phone, my charger. Like, that's not how it works, right? They left with no disposable income. They were left with nothing. Right? They moved into a new territory where it's very difficult for them to restart over their lives. There was no water, there's no home, there's no form of protectional institution that will ensure these individuals' welfare are continuously taken care of. The fact is they're being forcefully removed out of any form of agreement, being discriminated into an area where they have to relive their lives within a hellhole. Yes, I'm going to say that this is a form of ethnic cleansing, no matter how much you want to emphasize on the euphemism of, oh, no, this is just occupational over like the dispute of rights of territory. That's just a lie. Secondly, what is the good outcomes out of acknowledging that this is going to be categorized as ethnic cleansing? First off, is that now the international community has to take a stance and remove their support from Israel. Because more often than not, it's not just about support, but we also see fence-sitters on the ground. Like if you look into the entire EU bloc, usually they refuse to actually come in and directly want to partake, because they go, oh wait, there's just some form of dispute, we don't want to take sides because we're neutral like that. No, now when they acknowledge that a form of ethnic cleansing is happening and violation of human rights is happening, they will at least tell the Israelis, look, you have your state, Palestine, you have your state, but the idea of the dispute of the West Bank shouldn't include forceful removal without any forms of compensation, any forms of agreement, nor concessions, right? They realize the form of urgency. But second is how you change the mentality of the United States of America, right? Because they care about their international reputation and don't want to see as, not the bastion of human rights and people who are complicit to the violation of human rights. And why is this particularly good? Because now Israelis can no longer act with no repercussions, right? Because the reason why they continuously choose to extend and not want to meet halfway in negotiations is because they know they can get away with it, right? Palestinians have always been willing to give some forms of concessions within negotiations. They were even willing to give up some of their land according to the 1967 Borders Agreement. But Palestinians continuously disagreed because they knew they could, because what they were doing wasn't acknowledged as a human rights violation. United States of America now will be forced to at least tell them that this form of discrimination cannot continuously happen within the West Bank, and they can, and Israel will listen, and US will do this, right? The same way we see how Israelis listen to the US when they pressure Israelis and say, look, we understand you're pissed off at Iran, but you can't bomb them. The moment that you do, I will sanction you. That means US can still take a stance the moment something is acknowledged as a human rights violation, and Israelis will listen because they know that US is their biggest supporter and they can't survive without the US or any forms of sympathy, out of any forms of sympathy from the international community. Like it or not, ladies and gentlemen, lives of Palestinians will never change unless the international community takes a stance. Because if you notice, us staying neutral is actually us taking a stance against with the killings of the Palestinians. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister and I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition to begin the case against
We knew that this would be coming, that the side of the House on that side would massively exaggerate the characterization of the West Bank occupation by Israel. So it's very important to note about the various levels of recharacterization that will come from my speech, but it's also important to note that we are not in agreement of the West Bank occupation, nor is it our burden to defend it as something positive that is being done by the Israeli government, because we're unwilling to defend that. So on many levels, when they told you the Palestinians are being oppressed, we absolutely agree, and we don't think the West Bank should continue to occupy, the Israeli government should continue to occupy West Bank, but that's not the burden here. How will we clash with the side of government? On two levels. Number one, we're going to show you how both the intentions and the actions of the Israeli government in the West Bank occupation is not one that can be equally attributed as ethnic cleansing, but secondly, we think the label of ethnic cleansing by the international community will bring more harm than good to the positive progression to conflict resolution on the ground, and that's also our stance of today's debate. But before that, a few rebuttals. Number one, on the standards of ethnic cleansing, this is also a large chunk of our recharacterization and positive matter. Because we think for an action to constitute an extermination of an entire race, two standards must be fulfilled. Number one, your criminal intention must be extremely explicit and deliberate in systematically killing the people of a certain race. But number two, your criminal action must be a permanent extermination of that race, not a temporary displacement that allows them alternative avenues of escaping those deaths. That's why we believe in things such as that are uncontroversial, such as the extermination of 6 million Jews across Europe is ethnic cleansing. The genocide of 5 million Tutsis in Rwanda is ethnic cleansing, and extermination of ethnic Bosnians in Kosovo is ethnic cleansing. We don't think the West Bank occupation can ever reach the same severe, blatant breaches of humanity under those circumstances. Let's analyze those two standards. Number one, on criminal intention. We think this occupation is part of a coherent and legitimate military strategy. How so? Post the 6-day war, Israel was extremely paranoid of their neighbors, because after the conflict with Jordan ended in 1994, it is only then that they started to occupy the West Bank, the Sinai Peninsula, Golan Heights, and Gaza. But the West Bank in particular, they occupy because they require a buffer zone before Jordan can possibly reach Israeli borders and reignite the very same conflict. So they need to fill it with ultra-naturalists in order to protect their national security. Why does this characterization make more sense on the side of opposition? Because A, Israel decided to give up Gaza because they decided it was too near to the military, to the borders that was of no strategic use towards them, and therefore they were willing to make a political concession to give it up. But secondly, they also given up the Sinai Peninsula after they struck up a political agreement with Egypt, where Egypt will never ever again attack Israel. So we think in those circumstances, they don't want to kill these individuals and never had the criminal intention to do so. They're only doing it for their own benefit. Second standard on criminal action and harm. The Israeli government did not fire first as a means of extermination. Instead, they resorted to forceful eviction to drive them out from a different territory in order to protect their own community. But we think states do this all the time. When China forced people to move into the Xinjiang province, it's in order to balance out the Muslim community and to protect them better. We reject that when ethnic cleansing was pushed onto South Africa, it was in response to forceful eviction. Guys, it was in response to appetite when the ethnic cleansing, when people actually died in those circumstances. We don't think it's the same situation within the Gaza occupation, because A, they didn't have to die under forceful eviction, but B, if they intended to die, they would have died anyways. Within those levels of severity of harm, it's not the same. When they were stating that missiles were fired into the Gaza occupation, into the West Bank occupation, we reject that. Under those circumstances, there was actually a war when they fired those missiles. It is not during the West Bank occupation that they did those. Under those situations, those are already war crimes, and we're already dealing with those circumstances. You have to talk about the independent situation of West Bank occupation, whether or not those constitute as ethnic cleansing. We don't think they were able to discharge that burden. Second rebuttal. What are things that Mayor said that did not matter in this debate? Two things. Number one, she wanted to focus on the oppression suffered by the Palestinians. We agree and we empathize, and we think Israel should be told to not oppress them. But this, you have to show to us why this is your political strategy to do so. Because on our side, we're going to show you why those political strategies will cause more harm to the very people that you wanted to save. But secondly, she told you political parties shouldn't remain neutral. We agree. We think the international community should have a balance between sanctions and also political concessions. You have to prove why this is the way to create the changes that you want. They only told you Israel will follow whatever the US say. But why would the US undertake the burden of labeling them as ethnic cleansing when these are their allies and they're not even signatory to the Rome Statute in which ethnic cleansing is being prosecuted for? Those are the burdens and links that you did not prove. You have to show why particularly labeling them as ethnic cleansing is the way to resolve conflicts on the ground. We will discharge the counter burden on two levels. Number one, we're going to tell you why the demonization of Israel will regress the trends of moderation shown by them in modern history. Number two, we're going to show you why it grants moral legitimacy to radical movements on the ground to pursue more conflict under status quo. But before that, yes.
America was highly close to South Africa during the apartheid time. When we acknowledged that it was a human rights violation, only then did the US were willing to sanction them and US funds. How is this any different?
Number two, the amount of level of support that you show to Israel is completely disanalogous to US support to South Africa. We think Israel is the closest ally to the United States, even after they have made blatant breaches of human rights. But number two, we thought the blatant breaches of human rights is not to the same degree as ethnic cleansing, and therefore they have legitimacy that is being retained. Number one, demonization of Israel. What are the trends for progressions? We think firstly, the Israel government has agreed to meet with John Kerry in order to conduct negotiations, and those negotiations with Palestine is still currently ongoing. Number two, we think there has been no major military operations since Qassi operation in 2008. Any kind of violences that we observe now is sporadic in nature. But thirdly, after the international community recognized Palestine as a sovereign state, there was no resurgence of conflict or condemnation by the Palestinian government. We think these are good things that we should stand by and grant legitimacy to Israel for standing by this moderation. The key change here is that the moderation here was granted due to the recognition and support that the international community has given to Israel. Once that side of the House decided to free demonize them after they've given so much political concessions and efforts, we think this will further radicalize their efforts, because everything they've done so far has not been able to grant me legitimacy within the eyes of the international actor that I so actively crave for. We think these kinds of harms will regress moderation. But lastly, most importantly, granting more legitimacy. We think Hamas and Hezbollah on the ground believe that the PLO are Western puppets and are extremely fractionalized. They are looking for some kind of empowerment to further create a resurgence in violence. You empower the toxic political rhetoric that is an imperative to act out, because we have to stand by something as horrible as ethnic cleansing. You create a resurgence of conflict, not just towards the Israeli occupation, but also towards PLO. We think when conflicts happen from radical terrorists on the ground, there's room for Israel now to vilify the Palestinian government and now act out against Palestinians as a whole. This vilification and resurgence for conflicts is not something that we should stand by. Understanding that there are trends of progression and Israel has become more moderate in making political concessions, this side of the House will decide to not aggravate the kind of conflicts and aggression that we see on the status quo, and stand by the side of being fair, being objective, and not making harmful, lethal accusations of which those harms are not tantamount to ethnic cleansing. We are very proud to oppose.
I thank the Leader of Opposition and invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
It is not an exaggeration when the Goldstone report, which is recognized by the international community, recorded that more than 50 KH-59 missiles manufactured by Western forces were launched into the EZ2 zone during non-conflict times, ladies and gentlemen, which constituted a war crime which led to massive backlash on the ground. It is not an exaggeration when BBC Hard Talk grilled Benjamin Netanyahu for calling individuals who still choose to remain within the EZ2 area from being bulldozed as enemies of the state, as individuals who are combating Israel, even though their houses are over there, and it was not during the times of conflict. We think that's clearly what's happening on the ground, and it is not an exaggeration. But regardless, we will still engage with their characterizations. I'm going to look at three things in my speech. Firstly, the yardsticks of ethnic cleansing. Secondly, how this policy would impact, why the labeling would impact into policy changes. And finally, I'm going to look why this is a unique and pernicious form of occupation and why that's evil for the long run. So let's go to the first stand in this debate. Mai told us that there should be criminal intention without substantiating, just saying criminal intention. We say criminal intention can be extraction by the actions which you make. If that action is clearly leads to massive harm, therefore the intention can be extracted. I'll prove that in my speech later. Sit down. The second thing which she told us, it must be permanent. It shouldn't be temporary. That's untrue. In South Africa, when ethnic cleansing was labelled upon the government of South Africa for apartheid, it was still considered to be ethnic cleansing, even if it was temporary. The Roma community, ladies and gentlemen, should continuously cleanse off from the European region, was also recognized to be ethnic cleansing by the European Declaration of Human Rights. But why is this true? Why is the logic correct? Because their alternative is a false alternative. It is akin to you moving to a new area where you will be massacred nonetheless. What is this new area? 4 things. 1, you'll be locked into a Hamas-dominated area where infighting, terrorist attacks, when Israeli attacks happen on a daily basis. That means you are moving to a new area where you'll be killed. Sit down. Second, if you are lucky enough, you'll enter a new hellhole with no security, no house over your head, no underground base which you can go to if a missile strikes. You have no electricity, no water, no necessity for you to live. So if you don't get killed by Hamas, you get killed out of malnutrition, ladies and gentlemen. But thirdly, you left everything behind. Your businesses, your family, your money, everything is gone. It means you're starting in a new area without nothing, which means you're very, very vulnerable to any attack. But fourthly, this new area has no institutional support. Back then there were hospitals, there were electric support, state support, security, all of those in new area are not there. As a consequence, even if it is temporary, you will temporarily leave before you die, ladies and gentlemen. We think that's the characterization which they need to deal with. Sit down. One line rebuttal is insufficient, Then they told us, guys, like Israel is doing this because it is strategic. I don't give a damn. This is a selfish, exploitative strategy which is employed by Israel. How is it military strategy when it is recorded that the EZAC took place? It's not Israel's building fences and defenses. They're building houses over there. I don't know how it is military strategy for Israel to build houses over there, ladies and gentlemen. But even if it is true, this is an unjust strategy for you to force Palestinians out and let them die. We think that's a strategy which is unconscionable, especially when we've already characterized where Palestine have already ceded a substantial portion of its land according to the 1967 agreement, which was initially agreed by Israel, but when Netanyahu came to the power, continuous expansion happens on the ground. We think that is unconscionable. Sit down. Next, how will this labeling impact public policy? They told us now Israel will retaliate. Under status quo, Israel is making some form of secessions. Without any quotations at all, we told you Israel has been belligerent. Initially it was EZAC 1, expanded to Southwest Bank. EZAC 2, expanded to Northwest Bank. EZAC 3, and now there's discussion about EZAC 4. No secession have been made. Benjamin Netanyahu sees this as a popular move. That's why both parties in Israel agree to this move, ladies and gentlemen. Sit down. But secondly, they said Hezbollah will now radicalize. 1, the point which the international community does not even recognize the inhumane atrocities which are committed on the ground. That's when Hezbollah will be radicalized, when people sit on the sideline and let them die. On PLO, you say no, PLO will radicalize. No, PLO can use this as a capital for them to lobby for more rights towards the international community. Sit down. In just the same way, how Palestine was recognized as a state by UNESCO when it used the labeling of open air prison, which is Palestine. These are the unique labeling which they can use to lobby for more rights. Shafiq, you need to deal with that. Sit down. But how will this lead? But furthermore, Mayor told you that we can bring down the culture of impunity which Israel is under. They said, oh, but you need to balance it out. You can place sanctions upon Israel, but you shouldn't move towards ethnic cleansing. The only way for us to successfully sanction Israel is for us to place that ethnic cleansing labeling. If not, there's less of a political motive for any country to place sanctions upon it. Then they said, United States, why would you want to backtrack on its support? It's untrue. In South Africa, ladies and gentlemen, and South Africa is the Israel in Africa back then in the 1970s. Why is it so? South Africa was where United States military bases were at. South Africa was the negotiating point with most of the African regions. South Africa was where United States combat terrorist organizations in Africa. It is similar, ladies and gentlemen. But the point is, once ethnic cleansing was labeled for South Africa, it changed United States public policy. Because United States friends, the European Union backtracked its support, which forced United States to not stand alone and move out. That is an important characterization which we need to deal with. Mine.
Yes, since Israel gave up the occupation of Gaza and Sinai Peninsula, so why can you discern intentions from those actions? They are not looking to systematically exterminate Palestinians.
Okay, there's a clear difference, right? When they gave up Gaza and Sinai Peninsula, that was because of the 1967 border agreement. Unfortunately, when Benjamin Netanyahu, crazy guy, came into power, he backtracked that and enforced more settlement territories, EZAC 1, EZAC 2, EZAC 3, EZAC 4, not for military reasons, but for occupational reasons. That's different. Finally, why is occupation unique? 1, because it systematically and historically targets the consciousness of Palestinians since 1967. It creates that culture of oppression which Israelis on the ground internalize this as their right to have. That's why both political spectrum or political parties in Israel believe that this is their right, because this is a continuous trend which has been following. But secondly, it symbolizes the legacy of oppression. When Palestinians are forced to move from one place to another, and they are forcefully moved out by the trucks which are mobilized by the oppressors, that is psychologically scarring, because they have been oppressed for a very long time, and currently they're being oppressed again. But thirdly, this is a recurrent vicious cycle, right? Imagine if you are Palestinian. So you are forced to move to EZ2. You try to build a new house there. But unfortunately, next week you move to EZ3. And then the next week you are forced to move to EZ4. Your psychology says that my life is dispensable, that I fear of die at any point in time, that I'll give up with my life, because even if I'm lucky enough to build a new home, I'll most likely be evicted again. My ability to have basic psychological security will be wiped out, because I know that even if I move to a new place, my life is dispensable. I think this is atrocious. Anyone in this room should support this policy.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister and now invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
The standards in which the side of government set out this debate to be on what is ethnic cleansing, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be accepted. What was their standard? The bombings that happens in the West Bank and Gaza, the death that occurs, the displacement of individuals and families within Gaza and the West Bank is the standard. In that case, ladies and gentlemen, we think that other wars, for example, the Chinese aggression in Tibet, or the annexation of Crimea by Russian military forces, ladies and gentlemen, should be considered ethnic cleansing as well. We tell you that this is war. Whatever that Israel did in the West Bank as well as Gaza was in retaliation to rockets that was fired into Israel, ladies and gentlemen. We think this is a legitimate war strategy. Saddiq said it is not, because you can't build homes and occupy territory as a war strategy. We tell you, you can, because the same strategy was employed in Gaza, and when Israel thought that it was no longer necessary, they gave up Gaza, ladies and gentlemen. The same strategy was done in Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights, ladies and gentlemen, but they gave up Sinai Peninsula when Egypt decided to recognize Israel as a state. We think when you have a West Bank with a dilapidated government, when it is a breeding ground for terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda, Hamas, ladies and gentlemen, the Islamic Brigade, and hundreds more, we think that it is necessary for you to create a buffer zone in order to protect your national security. When you were attacked by 4 nations during the 6-day war, and the threat from Iran, ladies and gentlemen, that constantly support Hezbollah that's flying rockets into your borders on a daily basis, we think it is legitimate for you to set a buffer zone to protect your own citizens. We don't think that they engage with that characterization, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, Saddiq said that Hezbollah and Hamas won't be radicalized by labeling this ethnic cleansing. Because why would, they will only be radicalized if the international community do not recognize the suffering of the people on the ground. We tell you that the things that are done are terrible, but it's not ethnic cleansing, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that the international community are recognizing these acts as war crimes, as things that are terrible. And we think, ladies and gentlemen, you shouldn't go to a point where you label it as ethnic cleansing when it's not pragmatic for future conflict resolution. We think that part wasn't engaged. When Mai told you that it harms the ability for Israel and Palestine to go into more talks, ladies and gentlemen. Because why will this radicalize Hezbollah and Hamas even further? Because you grant them victims' narrative. They are the ones that are calling it ethnic cleansing. Now when the international community validates their narrative, ladies and gentlemen, we think it gives them more ground in order to recruit people, ladies and gentlemen, in order to vilify Israel even further. We think it creates a resurgence of violence because currently what's happening is that people are experiencing war fatigue. People are tired of war, ladies and gentlemen, in Israel-Palestine. When you put in a label of ethnic cleansing, it grants a resurgence of hope and morale on the part of radical Islamist groups to gain more recruits, ladies and gentlemen, to perpetrate violence within these countries. Lastly, they said that, you know what, Israel, US can moderate the behavior of Israel. We don't think so for two reasons. Firstly, based on trends. When US did not support the recognition of Palestine as a state and the admission of Palestine under the UN, under an observer status, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, we have to recognize that, policymakers in the United States are vulnerable to state capture by the Jewish lobby. And we think that this will not, will never be able to allow the United States government to moderate the things that are happening in Israel. So we don't think that that happens, ladies and gentlemen, under that side. What am I going to look at? I already talked to you on how it harms the process of negotiation and conflict resolution because it radicalizes people on the ground in Palestine and in West Bank as well in Gaza. I will tell you why this will radicalize the Netanyahu administration and the public sentiment, ladies and gentlemen, within Israel. But yes.
Shafiq, you agreed in your speech that Israel should be labeled as a war criminal, just not as a country which perpetuates ethnic cleansing. What's the difference between ethnic cleansing and war crime?
Okay, that was the same question I asked and the fact that they didn't answer, they want an answer now. Ladies and gentlemen, I clearly told you that ethnic cleansing is a permanent and concentrated extermination of a particular race. When you have Palestinians, ethnic Palestinians living in Israel and are able to go to school, ladies and gentlemen, it is not a concentrated violence against a particular ethnic group. It is a retaliation and it is a war strategy to occupy that place. And when they attack West Bank or Gaza, it's in retaliation to terrorist attacks that Israel faced. Now, how does this radicalize the Netanyahu administration? We have to recognize that if the international community doesn't recognize Netanyahu's efforts towards moderation, ladies and gentlemen, he will feel that whatever that he's doing is not sufficient in order to ensure better conflict resolution. Furthermore, we think that the people on the ground within Israel and the people within the Knesset, ladies and gentlemen, will feel that all his efforts towards moderation is not worth it, ladies and gentlemen, because despite all of that, you are being labeled as a government that is committing ethnic cleansing, ladies and gentlemen. The international community is not recognizing that you have agreed to peace talks. It's not recognizing that you agreed to halt the use of force, ladies and gentlemen, since Operation Castle. They don't recognize that they agreed to the ceasefire that was brokered by Morsi, ladies and gentlemen, that was unprecedented. We think there are 4 consequences to this. Firstly, you turn voters against Netanyahu because you empower ultra-nationalists within Israel, ladies and gentlemen, that, you know what, they're making it similar to what we suffered during the Holocaust, ladies and gentlemen, when we are not actually doing that. And that's problematic because Netanyahu is already showing trends towards moderation, and that regrets that, ladies and gentlemen, when voters don't want him to be in office anymore. Secondly, we think that it will be harder for Netanyahu to pass peaceful resolution in the Knesset because now other parties, other individuals within the Knesset will think, ladies and gentlemen, that whatever that we have done so far is not worth it. It hasn't been working. The international community is not recognizing them for it. We think that there's no moderate party, like obviously Kadima is on the left, but it's within the right spectrum, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that these people will hold other resolutions hostage because of the label and because of the actions that Netanyahu has done. And because you are showing weakness, the international community is biting Israel a lot more. Lastly, we think that they will refuse to negotiate. When the international community condemned Israel, ladies and gentlemen, when the General Assembly wanted to, during the Uniting for Peace situation, ladies and gentlemen, Israel didn't want to meet Yasser Arafat and negotiate with him, ladies and gentlemen, until the international community moderated their stance on Israel. Lastly, we think that it grants political capital to ultra-nationalists, ladies and gentlemen, to perpetrate violence within the occupied territory because now they feel that whatever they have done is, it's not justified for them to be branded as people that are committing ethnic cleansing. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation that is happening in Israel and the West Bank is a terrible one, and we recognize it for it. But it's definitely not ethnic cleansing, and you should recognize that, ladies and gentlemen.
I I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition and invite the government.
Let's put this in context. The Israeli government says that if you ethnically are a Palestinian, you cannot belong to this region. Effectively, ladies and gentlemen, you're cleansing out an ethnicity from that region. By definition, that is ethnic cleansing. Two issues in this debate. First, standards. Second, ladies and gentlemen, how individuals react. First, ladies and gentlemen, they said, oh, it must be a permanent killing of the entire, of the entire race. First, ladies and gentlemen, we told you we reject that characterization because we have given you analogies of how this has happened on a regular basis, ladies and gentlemen. The basis is that because of your ethnicity, you have been forcibly removed from particular places without compensation, forced to move into dangerous areas. Number one analogy we gave you was in the instance of South Africa, ladies and gentlemen, where black people were forcibly segregated to go to a different area, and that was considered ethnic cleansing, leading to international community providing support. The second, ladies and gentlemen, is the Roma community and how they face persecution within Europe and how they were forcibly removed from certain countries, meant, ladies and gentlemen, that was termed as ethnic cleansing as well. The definition of ethnic cleansing in modern times has definitely evolved, and that is something that side opposition had to deal with today. But even if you want to talk about that, ladies and gentlemen, we have characterized to you number one. They said, oh, it's not long term, but it is long term. The first, ladies and gentlemen, is that when they go in and say that you have to move out, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, this policy of sending in missiles into innocent homes and schools in order to intimidate these individuals already happens, right? And number two, the point at which this happens, it's not temporary, because once these people move out, they do this again to further expand those areas in the future as well. So we think this is long term. This is systematically, ethnically cleansing these individuals out. But furthermore, they have the knowledge, right? Don't tell me Israelis don't know that once these people move out, they will necessarily die because they're moving to other regions where there are no governments available, where Hamas controls everything, where there is no food available, and they actively block aid to those regions as well, by the way. So essentially, ladies and gentlemen, they have complete knowledge of ethnically cleansing. This means, ladies and gentlemen, they know that they're permanently killing these individuals, and we think that means they're ethnically being cleansed from those regions. We think furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, they're also, how is it that when you move in tanks to a particular region and children form human barricades who are unarmed are being rolled over by tanks? How is that, ladies and gentlemen, not an ethnic cleansing? Well, because the only reason they do it from unarmed children is because by ethnicity they are Palestinian. We think that is ethnically cleansing them. Second, ladies and gentlemen, the response they gave was, but it's illegitimate because we want to create a buffer zone. First, if that was really true, why would you place Israeli civilians within those housing settlements? It's not a buffer zone if you do that, right? You know those people are safe, and that's why, ladies and gentlemen, that happens. Second, why would you, but second, ladies and gentlemen, even if that was, let's assume, like it's true. So initially in 1967, they wanted to create a buffer zone. Why is it that they continuously have to do it now and expand the territory further and further every year? We think that, ladies and gentlemen, means that it's not necessarily true. But thirdly, we argued even if it's a strategy for their national security, if you commit a war crime, that has never been a legitimate reason for people to commit war crimes, right? We think, ladies and gentlemen, just the same way, even if you rape individuals, even if you use chemical weapons that help your country, that is something we bar completely, because in effect we consider that a war crime, in effect we consider that ethnic cleansing, even if it serves your country's interest. We don't think that's a legitimate reason for you to do so. Before we go ahead.
If they really wanted to kill them, why not just shoot at them rather than leave them to probably face them, because they can still move to PLO occupied areas where there's still water, food, and electricity.
Number one, they do send missiles in to kill them. Number two, the people who are there essentially are rolled over, ladies and gentlemen. Number three, they do effectively block aid from going into regions they go to, ladies and gentlemen, in order to make sure those people cannot survive. We think those are essentially things they do. But ladies and gentlemen, but the other reason they do this, ladies and gentlemen, is so that they can get away from being called ethnic cleansers, so that they can systematically exploit the system, ladies and gentlemen, and be able to continuously move them away. We think that is something they allow under their model. Sit down. Second issue, reactions. This is something that we must understand, and this is why they will lose. They said you will radicalize everyone because now you call them ethnic cleansers. But they themselves are okay with calling them war criminals. That doesn't to all of the harms you pointed out in this debate. Second, ladies and gentlemen, second, ladies and gentlemen, you said that these governments will be radicalized and therefore all of these harms will happen. But in my speech, she said they were okay with sanctioning Israel. If that's the case, ladies and gentlemen, all of those radicalizations will also happen under your model. The point is that you're willing to call them war criminals and sanction them, etc. All of your harms, if they're true, occur under your model as well. Sit down. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, what we told you, it's much more realistic that radicalization will not happen because, ladies and gentlemen, we give agency for PLO to be able to moderate, ladies and gentlemen, to push for political rights using this as a strategy, right? Second, ladies and gentlemen, we also told you that the rhetoric will be diluted because now moderates can create counter discourse saying that, you know what, the international community has been willing to lend us support by terming it the ethnic cleansing as well. Third, ladies and gentlemen, they said, okay, this is something we must understand, right? They said the United States will never do this. So, first response, this is by fiat, ladies and gentlemen. The motion assumes we have the ability to call them ethnic cleansers, right? That means under our policy, obviously, the United States will be able to do this. But second, ladies and gentlemen, even then, even though they resorted to that tactic, we still debated. We told you that the United States does have an ability to do so because they don't want to be seen complicit to war criminals, complicit to ethnic cleansers, ladies and gentlemen. In just the same way they did it to South Africa, I'll add examples here. In just the same way they did it to Brazil, ladies and gentlemen, when they wanted to build nuclear weapons, for instance. Sit down. We told you, ladies and gentlemen, then they said, but that means the Israeli government will be radicalized even further, and Netanyahu will lose votes. Netanyahu is the most conservative politician that exists in Israel. If he loses vote to the liberal opposition, ladies and gentlemen, we're fine with that. Second, ladies and gentlemen, is that under your model, what you must understand is that we think the more realistic approach is that rather than being radicalized, because he's already radicalized, he doesn't listen to any kinds of negotiations. Every time he kicks out the Palestinians from negotiations. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, whenever it comes to negotiations, the Palestinians have already conceded 1967 borders. He still wants more. That's not a person, like, you cannot really radicalize him further. But we think, ladies and gentlemen, the more realistic approach is for the United States to put pressure. And this is something they have not responded. We have military leverage over them. We have economic leverage over them. They cannot turn to alternatives such as Middle East because the Middle East would never trade with them. We think, ladies and gentlemen, because we provide incentives, in just the same way when we told them, if you bomb Iran, we will remove support, they never bombed Iran, even though they wanted to. We think we are the only ones who create pressure for them to be able to moderate with the negotiations. We give all kinds of leverages, ladies and gentlemen. We are definitely taking this debate home.
I thank the government. I'd like to invite the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we understand that being from IIU, they feel they have a higher moral duty to propose this model. It was also very impressive that Saddiq could quote the names of ballistic missiles from his days in military school. But ladies and gentlemen, to make statements that are bordering on equity violations, saying things like, I don't give a damn, they don't deserve to be there, is insensitive to the dynamics of the situation, ladies and gentlemen, where we told you that the Israeli occupation of the West Bank has strategic military interests as well as, ladies and gentlemen, national interests. We think it's unfair for them to compare this occupation and show that it is tantamount to apartheid or genocide, ladies and gentlemen. They also never dealt with how their model further perpetrates and makes violence worse on the ground. Now, at the end of this debate, ladies and gentlemen, both sides agree that forceful removal happens, right? We both agree that Palestinians do deserve some interest in the West Bank. The question is then, what do we call this occupation? Now, it's very important, Mr. Speaker, judging panel, and everyone in this room, for us to delineate what they asserted to be war crimes than, just basic occupation. Because if their argument for war crimes is to say, oh, because the majority of targets are Palestinians in the first place, that it has to be war crimes, it has to be ethnic cleansing, then you have to call Hamas's attacks on Jews because, hey, the majority of their targets are Jews, so that has to be ethnic cleansing as well. That's a zero-sum game, ladies and gentlemen. This debate has to be about occupation and nothing else. So 3 issues in my speech. Firstly, how do we best garner how should the international community best approach Israel? Secondly, how do we best end violence on the ground? Thirdly, is forceful removal tantamount to ethnic cleansing? No, thank you, Mayor. Firstly, how does the international community best approach this problem? The government side in today's debate said it's with very simplistic logic, said if we label it as something so horrendous, everyone is going to be bound to do something about it because it's politically interested. Secondly, we told you on the other hand that causes more harm than good. The way I'll resolve this class is to show you that that kind of international support will play a negative role in the long run. The first response to have is that this is fundamentally different from apartheid and the persecution of Romas, because there was no state utility in those instances, ladies and gentlemen. We told you that under that currently, like for example, it's not like the whole of Israel is trying to get rid of all Palestinians. We allow them to live in Gaza, we allow them to live in other parts of the West Bank, not Jericho, places like Nablus and Hebron, for example. It's not like we're denying them the rights to go to school, the rights to get jobs. This is simply, ladies and gentlemen, to keep that border, the EZ1, EZ2, and all those other numbers and letters Saddiq was talking about, as strategic military buffers against Jordan and against Lebanon, ladies and gentlemen. And then they said, hang on, these are civilian populations. How can you use them as military buffers? Even Malaysia has a military buffer with Singapore. It's called Johor, ladies and gentlemen. We say, ladies and gentlemen, as well, it's not like the Palestinian people can't actually live or like self-actualize. We don't think that they're completely eradicated away from the West Bank. They actually have a Palestinian National Authority. They have a prime minister of the Palestinian National Authority in the West Bank. He's called Radi Hamdallah, ladies and gentlemen. And it's not like they're completely being exterminated from these lands. Second response, we think under your model, you make Netanyahu even more reluctant to come to the negotiation table and like reform his policies. Because even you conceded that he was one who holds the power. Like the reason why the Oslo Accords could happen was because Jimmy Carter and Yasser Arafat came to the table and was ready to acknowledge the existence of the state of Israel and allow Israel certain concessions in those areas. If you label them, ladies and gentlemen, and if the international community shows to Israel that it's not ready to make concessions and it's trying punitive measures to try and punish Israel, we think that Netanyahu is not going to be incentivized to come and talk at the table. Thirdly, we said that it regresses Israel to the age of paranoia between the 60s and the 90s, ladies and gentlemen. During those times, when everyone was like, when the state of Israel was still new and they were saying that they were discriminating Arabs and Palestinians, this is exactly when people like Ehud Olmert, Ehud Barak was like, started wars and all these like first, second, third intifadas, ladies and gentlemen, and that is exactly when Israel was in paranoia. If the entire international community now becomes the enemy of Israel, given that it's already surrounded by like enemy states around it, we think it's going to make Israel even more insulated, even more intuitive, ladies and gentlemen, and they're going to be even more violent in the long run because no one else is ready to support them because everything they do is apparently wrong. Fourthly, we think you do not give an opportunity for Israel politics to moderate because now the right-wing parties of the Likud and the Kadima parties are those individuals who come into parliament and say Palestinians don't have a right to be here because they're not Jewish. Those are the very people that you're empowering because now under your model these people can't turn back. Israel can't turn back, ladies and gentlemen, because they've already got that label on them. It is more likely that the right wings of these parties are going to use that as political rhetoric to say, hey, since we're already ethnically cleansing and labeled as ethnic cleansers in the first place, it's much better that we just continue with this and just completely eradicate all Palestinians from the West Bank. We think, ladies and gentlemen, under our model, they are more ready to negotiate because, when the United States using things like military aid, infrastructure, and technology to make these kinds of concessions to them. Then Saddiq said, "Oh, hang on, the PLO went to the UN and called Palestine an open-air prison. That label worked for them." Yes, there was no ethnic or racial relation to that label, ladies and gentlemen. But the reason why the PLO and Mahmoud Abbas gained so much traction is because of their reasonableness. Ladies and gentlemen, they represent the moderate, educated Palestinians. But if the Palestinian Liberation Organization starts using this term that, hey, we're being ethnically cleansed, we think it harms the ability and the political capital of EU countries or the United States to have any sort or make any sort of concessions or negotiations to these individuals. Because the Jewish lobby in America and France and the United Kingdom are not going to be happy with their governments talking to an organization that calls their very people ethnic cleansers. Yes.
By that logic, why will Benjamin Netanyahu come to the negotiating table if you also call him a war criminal?
Ladies and gentlemen, we told you that two things have to happen before Israel can reform. Firstly, the military operations need to stop. But secondly, there has to be a sort of tacit approval from the international community to say that yes, although we're not happy with what Israel's doing, we recognize that to a certain extent they have a right to do that. If you label them as evil tyrants, then it's never, ladies and gentlemen, they will never come to the negotiation table and reform. Lastly, how do you best end violence on the ground? They never dealt with this argument, ladies and gentlemen, how Hamas now has the victim's narrative. Now Hamas can go into the West Bank, just like they did in Gaza Strip, where they went around telling people, hey, they're killing us because we're Muslim. They're killing us because we're Muslim. They can go into the West Bank and do that very same narrative, because now they'll see that, hey, the international community is supporting that very narrative, ladies and gentlemen. They have no incentive to moderate. Lastly, is forceful removal tantamount to ethnic cleansing? We told you this already, ladies and gentlemen, that it's not. Because it's not like these Palestinians don't have any rights at all. We say that to a certain extent, yes. On the borders of Jericho, the borders of the Golden Heights, yes, they're not allowed to live there because those are strategic zones. Places like Hebron, places like Hebron, places like the Gaza Strip, those are already places that they can live in. This is not ethnic cleansing because we're not trying to exterminate Palestinians. We just want the West Bank to remain, for now, as a militarily strategic zone, and we're very, very happy to fight for Israel's right to keep that.
And the opposition whip, I'd like to invite the opposition of live speech.
Apparently the way IIUM wins debates is by quoting military reports, is it 1, is it 2, is it 3, and that's how characterizations are won in geopol debates. We reject that because we believe in a geopolitical analysis on state behavior. We believe in talking about what they did in the past, what they're doing right now, and how they responded to certain activities in analogy of other things that are happening at that moment in time. We believe these are accurate and fair characterizations on what is happening on the ground. So let's do a lot of housekeeping on characterizations before we move on, because we believe all of their premises are tangent upon them winning those characterizations, and without that, they win no premises. Number 1, they said missiles were shot and people died, so therefore Israel intended to kill Palestinians. We said, yes, Captain Obvious, but when were they fired? Missiles were only shot when the war was going on. We told you there was no major military operation since Operation Castle in 2008. Why does this characterization make more sense on our side? Because political concessions and political engagement cannot happen when there's no ceasefire. The fact that they've already agreed to meet with the PLO using John Kerry as a mediator means that right now there is a ceasefire and there's no major military operations that are killing Palestinians as we speak of. But why did we give you a better characterization on Israelis' intention? We told you A, forceful eviction did not include the systematic extermination and permanent death of those ethnic. We told you B, in Shafiq's speech, Palestinians are living in Israel as well and they're doing so in peace. So obviously it's not a qualm on their ethnic identity. But C, we told you they gave up on the alleged extermination of Palestinians when they gave up the West Bank and Sinai Peninsula. All of these characterizations meant that there was never any identity, like a definition of exterminating a specific ethnic that belongs under status quo, and therefore they don't have the intention to do so. They said, no, just because military strategy overlaps with an area that is happen to be concentrated by Palestinians, that no, if Singapore attacks Malaysia and it's not an attack on Malays, they do so because the state is a military threat. It's an unfortunate coincidence that their state of Palestinian is occupied with a singular race that is Palestinian, Mr. Speaker. We don't think this is a strategy to kill off the race. The second characterization, they say that the US can sanction South Africa, therefore they can sanction Israel. How is this actively disanalogous? Because Israel has already committed the levels of blatant breaches of human rights, have already become war criminals, and they still stood behind their Israeli ally. If you're watching Price for South Africa, they would have already sanctioned them, and that's the difference between South Africa and Israel. The amount of alliance and support that is started towards Israel is disanalogous to the support that they gave to South Africa. Thirdly, they said when Palestinians moved out, they couldn't live anywhere with water and electricity. They cannot possibly win this characterization because otherwise, literally the whole of Palestine is not livable at all. We told you, surrounding the West Bank, there's Nazareth, there's Hebron, there's Marvelous, thank you for the names of these districts, Rafiq. Otherwise, then they would all die the Palestinian state because there's no livable water and electricity everywhere. The reason why there's less than livable conditions is because they're already in a destitute state. So even if you live in West Bank, you will still suffer those same conditions, guys. It's not actively created. It's not actively death created by the Israeli government. Lastly, they say you can call them war criminals and sanction them, so we will still radicalize them under our model. Number 1, I told you in my speech, we want a balance of positive and negative reinforcement, so Israel will never feel completely isolated and feel as if they lost complete recognition from the international community. How does this actively dissimilar from them? The label of ethnic cleansing is a holistic label by the international community, and you want their BFF to also endorse that label, under that situation, then you have no positive reinforcement, Mr. Speaker. But also, the level of war crimes applies because they actually did it, and they made a recognition, and they made closure of it after the Oslo cause. But when you accuse them of something that they did not do, because they did not do ethnic cleansing, that's when they figure out being unfairly demonized on this little school and become more radicalized. Lastly, this was the dumbest thing. They didn't want to engage with being radical because they're already radical. Just because you're radical doesn't mean there's not room to become more radical. The fact that we had a ceasefire in 2008 means there's a lot of room for more else to happen. They didn't want to engage with my argument how there's room for resurgence of conflict on radical terrorist organizations and why that's the room to create worse conflicts. They didn't want to engage with the fact that there's concrete, factual trends of moderation of Israel, and they should not deserve the kind of punishment that you're pushing onto them by calling them people who perpetuate ethnic cleansing. We're proud to defend Israel in this debate.
And to bring this semi-final to a close, I'd like to invite the government to flag.
Please, don't be persuaded by the side who thinks that it is moderate for us to impose the labeling of a war criminal, just not ethnic cleansing. I think even if you don't believe in that characterization, you know the margin is unbelievably thin, and most of opposition benefits fall in that thin margin. So I'm going to answer 3 questions in this debate. Number 1, what standards should we use? Secondly, even if those standards are wrong, is it legitimate to use this as a tactic? And thirdly, what are the policy outcomes? On standards, if you do look back at your notes, we at least engaged with their 2 standards while they did not with ours. Firstly, on criminal intention, what did government tell you? Number 1, since Israel knows the consequences of evicting these people out and they still consistently block aid into Palestine, therefore they are complicit through intention. I also told you in my speech that intention can be a manifest of actions. We think that itself is legitimate. But on permanence, right? We told you the evolution of international law dictates that it doesn't only have to be about death, even though we argued the worst case scenario that people are being bulldozed over, as the record has shown. You can't just say that, we quote facts. Facts dictate debates as well. It was only in WIP did they contest with our characterization that, you can move to other PLO areas. Even then, what did we tell you? Number 1, Mubarrat already told you that unfortunately, distance-wise, it is much closer to move to a Hamas-dominated area, where EZ2 and 3 are closer there. Ladies and gentlemen, especially when individuals are on foot, because of our characterization that they left everything behind. But we went further. Even if you move to PLO-dominated areas, I brought up a myriad of harms. 1, they will still have no security. They have no houses, no water and electricity, ladies and gentlemen, because they need to start fresh in that particular area. Especially when resources are really low, when a substantial portion of people move there, you need something new. Second, you have left everything behind, your businesses, your family, your living. That's also a problem. Third, this characterization was so important for me, it is a shame that did not engage with it. Palestinians will believe that their life is futile. Even if they move to EZ3, which is a PLO area, they will most likely be detached again, moved to EZ4, moved to another PLO area, kicked out to the point that they think that life is disposable. No response from that side of the house. It symbolizes the legacy of oppression, where it's psychologically scarring that you're being kicked out by your oppressor. No response from that side of the house. I dislike being very technical, but you will need to look back your notes. You know that these 4 things were not engaged by that side of the house. Even if, ladies and gentlemen, it is insufficient, you know that did not engage with our standards, ladies and gentlemen, in this debate. We think that is important. Let's look at the second clash in this debate. Is it legitimate? They say that this happens during times of war. We have already contested with that, right? The last war which broke out was in 2012, the cast record which you yourself quoted. Now, the occupation is happening until today. An average reasonable person knows this. Even if you don't, we told you that. You need to contest with that fact, ladies and gentlemen. But even if it's during times of war, we went so much further. It's still a wrong strategy, right? Like, because this area is largely occupied by housing. You quoted Singapore. Let's see how our analysis will come, right? So assuming that Joe is the buffer, So initially, EZ2 is Johor. And then there's still one more. They move to EZ3. They take Melaka. And then after that, oh no, EZ3 is not enough. We go to EZ4. We take Kuala Lumpur. That's the analogy which you need to defend under your policy. The expansion continuously happens. It can't be a buffer. How much more buffer do you want, ladies and gentlemen? That's simply untrue. But finally, on policy outcome, you simply can't be persuaded that suddenly less radicalization will happen if you call Netanyahu a war criminal, which will even affiliate Nazi Germany or freaking Hitler too, right? But even if we still give you analysis why change will happen, if we really want the right-wing people will lose vote, we think, no, they will not radicalize, they'll be forced to moderate in order for them to stay in power. Because now pressure coming from EU and United States will compel you to change. So either one of two things happen. It's either you radicalize, which I don't know what else can you do, when you've already lost so much international support. The most convenient choice for you is to become moderate, in contrast you to radicalize and lose support continuously. I'm doing this not because I'm an IIU student, because I'm a decent human being. I'm extremely proud to propose.